For 23 years, Ed Sullivan never lost control on live television. Not once. Not ever. Not for anyone. Until Sunday night, March 12, 1967, when a 9-year-old boy sat alone in the third row of his studio audience. Marcus Thompson had saved $14 from his paper route and taken a Greyhound bus from Cleveland to New York City. In his pocket was a photograph of his father, a man who'd disappeared into the world of television 5 years earlier. The boy believed if he came to Ed Sullivan's show, somehow his father would see him. What happened when Ed Sullivan discovered this child in his audience changed everything. The script was abandoned, the show stopped cold, and the most composed man in television history began to cry on live camera. But the real shock came 18 minutes later, when those studio doors burst open. Because sometimes a boy's hope is stronger than a father's absence. And sometimes the whole world needs to stop what it's doing to bring them back together. The CBS television studio at Broadway and 53rd Street hummed with its familiar Sunday rhythm on March the 12th, 1967. By 7 o'clock, the audience line stretched around the block despite the sharp March wind cutting through Manhattan. These were the devoted fans who planned their weekends around Ed Sullivan, who knew that Sunday night at 8 meant America would gather as one. Inside Studio 50, the crew moved through their practiced choreography. The camera operators checked their shots while the lighting director made final adjustments to the overhead rigs. In the orchestra pit, Ray Bloch raised his baton for the warm-up, the brass section running through the Supremes' arrangement one last time. Everything calibrated to the minute, every movement rehearsed to perfection. Ed Sullivan stood in his dressing room, straightening his narrow black tie for the third time. At 65, he'd become more than a television host. He was Sunday night itself, the man who could make or break careers with a nod, who'd introduced America to Elvis and the Beatles, who maintained such rigid control that even his awkwardness had become endearing. His assistant knocked twice. 5 minutes, Mr. Sullivan. But in the third row of the filling auditorium, 9-year-old Marcus Thompson understood nothing about show business precision. He'd left Cleveland's Greyhound station at 6 that morning, telling his grandmother he was staying at his friend Bobby's house. The lie had burned in his throat, but the need was stronger than the guilt. $14.50 from 3 months of delivering the Cleveland Plain dealer, folded carefully in his shoe. A cheese sandwich wrapped in wax paper, now eaten somewhere around Youngstown. And in his jacket pocket, smooth from handling, a photograph that had become his compass. The photograph showed Private First Class William Jerome Thompson, 22 years old, standing beside his Army band trumpet at Fort Benning, Georgia. Marcus could barely remember the man in the picture anymore. Just fragments, the smell of valve oil, large hands adjusting his tiny fingers on trumpet keys, a voice singing him to sleep. His mother had kept the photo on the mantel until she passed 2 winters ago. Now Marcus carried it everywhere. His father's last letter had arrived at their old apartment 2 years back, forwarded by neighbors. Found good work in television in New York. Sending money soon. Tell Marcus I'm making something of myself. But no money came, no address, just those words about television in New York. So Marcus had built his plan with a child's perfect logic. If his father worked in television, he'd be at the most important television show in America. Everyone watched Ed Sullivan. Everyone. At exactly 8 o'clock, Ed Sullivan emerged through the gold curtain to thunderous applause. His opening monologue rolled out with practiced precision. A joke about the weather, a nod to St. Patrick's Day coming up, a promise of tremendous acts ahead. The Supremes would perform Love Is Here and Now You're Gone, their latest #1 hit. A British comedian named Dave Allen would deliver his routine about giving up smoking. The Hungarian acrobat troupe would astound with their human pyramid. 23 minutes in, Diana Ross's voice soared through the studio, her sequined gown catching the stage lights like scattered stars. Marcus watched from his seat, scanning every visible crew member, every shadow moving behind the cameras. During commercial breaks, he stood on his chair, searching the orchestra pit, studying each musician's face. The trumpet player was white, elderly, definitely not his father. It was production assistant Janet Mills who noticed him during the blackout after the Supremes' performance. The boy was crying silently, shoulders shaking, still clutching something in his hands. Janet had worked at CBS for 3 years, had seen countless audience members overcome with emotion. But this was different. This child was alone. She slipped through the row during the commercial break, kneeling beside him. "Honey, where are your parents?" Marcus looked up, his face streaked with tears. "I'm looking for my daddy. He works in television." "Is he part of the show tonight?" The boy shook his head, pulling out the photograph. "He said he worked in television in New York. I thought he'd be here." Janet's heart seized. She glanced at the photograph, a young black serviceman, bright smile, trumpet in hand. "Sweetheart, how did you get here?" "Bus from Cleveland, by myself." The stage manager was calling 60 seconds to air. Janet knew the protocol. Security should handle this, escort the child out, call the authorities. But something in Marcus's eyes, the way he held that photograph like a lifeline, made her break protocol. She rushed backstage, finding Ed reviewing his notes. "Mr. Sullivan, there's a situation. A child in the audience, traveled alone from Ohio. He's looking for his father, who supposedly works in television." Ed's first response was pure professionalism. "We're back in 45 seconds. Have security. He's 9 years old, Mr. Sullivan. 9. His mother died. He thinks his father will see him if he comes to your show." Ed Sullivan had introduced royalty and rebels, had maintained composure through assassination coverage and controversial performances. But something in Janet's voice, in the absurdity and desperation of a child traveling hundreds of miles on hope alone, pierced through his armor. "Bring him backstage," Ed said suddenly. "Next commercial break. Bring him to me." The comedy segment proceeded, but Ed Sullivan performed on autopilot. Dave Allen delivered his perfectly timed observations about modern life while Ed stood in the wings, his mind wrestling with what waited backstage. When the lights dimmed for the commercial break at 8:31, Marcus Thompson was led through the backstage maze to where Ed waited. The boy seemed even smaller among the equipment cases and cable runs. His suit jacket, clearly borrowed, hung past his wrists. His shoes, polished with care, showed cardboard reinforcement through the worn soles. When he looked up at Ed Sullivan, America's most powerful television host saw something that would haunt him forever. Pure, desperate hope. "This is my father," Marcus said, offering the photograph with trembling hands. "William Jerome Thompson. He played trumpet in the Army band. He said he got work in television after he got out." Ed studied the photograph carefully. The young serviceman's pride radiated from the image. That particular glow of someone believing better days lay ahead. The photo's edges were soft, the surface clouded from constant handling. "When did you last see your father, son?" "When I was 4, sir. He went to California for work first, then wrote that he was coming to New York. Mama got sick after that." The boy's voice dropped. "She passed 2 years ago. Grandma says Daddy doesn't know." Ed felt something fundamental shift inside him. He'd interviewed heads of state and Hollywood legends, but this child's quiet dignity undid him. "What makes you think he's in television?" "His last letter. He said he found good work in television in New York. Said he was making something of himself." Marcus pulled out a worn envelope from his pocket. The return address was blank, but the postmark read, New York City, March 1965. Ed turned to his production manager, Bob Precht. "I want every studio musician's name, every union list, every television studio in the city checked. Start with the networks, then the independent stations, then the recording studios." "Ed, we're back in 90 seconds. Session players, substitutes, everyone who's held a trumpet near a television camera in the last 2 years." Ed's voice carried an authority that allowed no argument. "William Jerome Thompson. Find him." He looked down at Marcus, whose eyes had widened with dawning realization that this powerful man was taking him seriously. You're going to sit right here backstage where you can see everything. Right here, understand?" The stage manager called 30 seconds. Ed straightened his tie, his hand surprisingly unsteady. In 23 years of live television, he'd never felt less prepared to face the camera. As he walked toward his mark, he heard Marcus's small voice behind him. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan." The Hungarian acrobats performed their routine flawlessly, but Ed barely watched. During each commercial break, he returned to Marcus, who sat on an equipment case, legs dangling, still clutching the photograph. The boy's eyes followed every movement backstage with diminishing hope as each face proved unfamiliar. By 8:35, the phone calls had rippled through New York's television community like an emergency broadcast. CBS musicians called NBC colleagues. NBC contacted ABC. Studio managers pulled union rosters. The invisible network of New York's working musicians activated. Trumpet players calling trumpet players, asking if anyone knew William Jerome Thompson from Cleveland. Army Band would be about 30 now. At Radio City Music Hall, a rehearsal pianist remembered someone. At NBC, a saxophonist thought the name sounded familiar. Then, at 8:41, a Filipino janitor at CBS Radio mentioned something that made everyone pause. "There's a William who works nights at Studio B on 52nd Street. Quiet man. Plays trumpet. Cleans the place after sessions. But sometimes they let him sit in." Ed was supposed to introduce the closing act at 8:42. The Italian singers stood ready in the wings. But as Bob Precht whispered the news about Studio B, Ed Sullivan made a decision that violated every principle of live television. He walked to center stage and raised his hand for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice different, stripped of its practiced cadence. "We have a young man here tonight, Marcus Thompson, 9 years old, who traveled alone by bus from Cleveland to find his father." The camera operators, unprepared for this departure from script, scrambled to adjust. The director in the control booth sat frozen, unsure whether to cut to commercial. His father's name is William Jerome Thompson, a trumpet player who served our country and told his son he worked in television in New York. Ed's voice began to crack, something no one had ever heard on air. Marcus hasn't seen his father in 5 years. His mother passed away, and his father doesn't know. The studio audience fell completely silent. Ed Sullivan, the man who'd maintained composure through Kennedy's assassination coverage, who'd never shown emotion through decades of live television, was crying on camera. "If William Thompson is watching, if anyone knows William Jerome Thompson who plays trumpet," his voice broke completely. He pulled out his handkerchief, not even trying to hide his tears. "Your son is here. Your boy is here looking for you." Then Ed did something that would be replayed for decades. He turned toward the wings and beckoned. Marcus walked onto the stage, that oversized jacket making him look even smaller under the lights. He stood beside Ed and held up the photograph toward the camera. "Daddy," Marcus said into the microphone, "if you're watching, I'm here." The studio switchboard exploded like nothing CBS had ever experienced. Within 60 seconds, over 400 calls flooded in. Operators, overwhelmed, began routing calls to NBC and ABC. Television crews across New York mobilized. At Studio B on 52nd Street, an engineer burst into the maintenance room where William Thompson was mopping floors between sessions. William Thompson, your boy is on Ed Sullivan. Your son is looking for you." William dropped his mop, his legs nearly giving way. "My boy? Marcus?" He hadn't seen his son in 5 years. The letters he'd sent to their old Cleveland address had been returned. The money orders he'd saved came back uncashed. He'd been told they'd moved, possibly to Detroit. He'd been saving every penny from 3 jobs to hire someone to find them. At 8:51, breathless production assistant Janet Mills rushed on stage during the live broadcast. She whispered urgently to Ed, whose face transformed with something beyond relief. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ed announced, his voice still thick with emotion, "William Thompson has been found. He's at Recording Studio B on 52nd Street. He's on his way here now." The audience erupted. People leaped to their feet, strangers embracing, tears flowing freely. Ed knelt beside Marcus. "Your daddy's coming, son. He's coming right now." The next 18 minutes became the longest in television history. Ed tried to continue with the scheduled acts, but nobody cared. The cameras stayed on Marcus, who sat in a chair center stage, swinging his legs, the photograph still in his hands. The audience remained standing, hundreds of people united in anticipation. At 9:09, the studio doors burst open. William Jerome Thompson, still in his janitor's coveralls, his trumpet case in hand, ran down the aisle. The cameras captured everything. Marcus's eyes widening in recognition, his leap from the chair, his small body launching forward. "Daddy! Daddy!" William dropped to his knees as Marcus crashed into his arms. The father and son clung to each other center stage, William sobbing uncontrollably. "I didn't know about your mama. I didn't know. I've been looking for you. I've been looking everywhere." Ed Sullivan stood to the side, tears streaming down his face. The audience remained on their feet, witnessing something beyond entertainment. Pure, unbridled love, breaking through years of separation. William pulled back to look at his son's face, touching it as if to confirm he was real. "How did you find me?" "I knew you were in television," Marcus said simply, "so I came to Mr. Sullivan." That night, the Ed Sullivan Show ran 12 minutes over its scheduled time. Before signing off, Ed announced that CBS would establish an emergency fund to reunite separated families. Within a week, over $300,000 poured in. The Marcus Thompson Fund would reunite 847 families over the next 3 years.